here and on Facebook. Takes a second. All right. We have a tremendous lineup for you today. We are just so excited to get for you to meet the candidates running for Congress and for statewide office. And as soon as I can get Facebook to cooperate, let me try one more time, then we'll get going. Everything's set up. If you have any questions, you are welcome to drop them in the chat. And we'll see that. Right. Welcome to our Texans Abroad Meet the Candidates panel, featuring our tremendous statewide slate of two key congressional districts. We'll be hearing from Jake Kleburg for Land Commissioner, Jan McDowell running in Congressional District 24, Susan Hayes for Agricultural Commissioner, Janet Dudding for Comptroller, Michelle Vallejo running in the incredibly tight race in Congressional District 15, Rochelle Garza for Attorney General, and a message from Luke Warford for Railroad Commissioner. I'm Jennifer von Estorff, the Democrats Abroad Global State Teams Coordinator and the team lead of Texans Abroad. I was born and raised in Abilene, Texas, and I've lived in Germany for the last 20 years, and it has been my great pleasure to be a part of the team helping to establish our state-focused outreach and our efforts to assist and encourage Texans living overseas to cast their votes up and especially down the ballot. Thank you so much for being with us today from across the globe. Your votes from abroad will be so crucial in this fight to turn Texas blue in just a few short weeks. It's hard to believe how quickly that's coming up on us. There is so much on the line in the most critical election of our lifetimes: a woman's right to make decisions about her own body, the safety of our children, especially trans children, responsible gun laws, education, and even democracy itself. With so many far-right election deniers running for office across the state, it has never been more important that every single Texas Democrat at home and abroad cast their ballot this year. That means that we can't just be responsible for getting our own ballots back, though that, of course, is a great start. And on that note, our ballots will be sent out starting September 24th, so the time is coming. But we also need to reach out to anyone and everyone we know living abroad and make sure that they have a plan to vote. Then make sure that your family and friends back home are also registered to vote and that they know exactly what to do. It's all hands on deck to preserve the future of our state and our country. That is why we at Texans Abroad are doing everything we can to mobilize the overseas vote. We're phone banking in English and in Spanish. We're offering voter registration and voter assistance events, including our global effort, Register Together, on September 17th. We're sending emails, postal mailings, using social media and digital ads, and reaching out to universities and study abroad students. And of course, hosting these wonderful events with our amazing Democratic candidates. You can be a part of these efforts. First off, be sure to request your ballot for 2022 by visiting votefromabroad.org. You need to do this every single calendar year, so if you haven't yet, do it today. You can also help mobilize voters. Who else do you know living abroad? Please also urge them to go to Vote From Abroad and let them know that we are here to help if they have problems or questions, and please share our guide to voting in Texas from abroad as well as today's recording. I'll be popping all of those links in the chat. You can also help contact your alma mater to share voting information to students studying abroad. You can join one of our many phenomenal state teams, such as Texans Abroad. You can make phone calls to DA members to ensure that they're ready to vote, and you can amplify our message on social media. Of course, another quick and easy way to help get out the word is to donate to Democrats Abroad and support all of this work. You'll find all of these links in the chat. And we once again thank you for joining us today. And with that, I will hand over to my colleague, Franz Liebster, to introduce our first candidate.
Hello, everyone. We begin today by welcoming Jay Kleburg, who is running for the office of the Commissioner of the Texas General Land Office. The General Land Office manages Texas's publicly owned state lands and helps fund public education through the royalties and proceeds from land sales which are added to the permanent school fund. The GLO also helps Texans recovering from natural disasters, provides benefits to Texas veterans, manages the vast Texas coast, and even operates the Alamo. Jay was born and raised on a working ranch in South Texas. Growing up, Jay developed a deep respect for the land and the meaning of hard work. He learned that our individual freedoms do not negate our responsibility to one another. Those values have helped define his career as Associate Director of the Texas Parks and Wildlife Foundation, documentary film producer, and co-founder of the startup business Explore Ranches. Jay is running to put the focus of the GLO back to where it belongs, respecting the land, funding our children's future, and being a responsible steward protecting the public and economic health of Texas. Jay serves as a director of Texas Lyceum, a nonpartisan civic engagement group, an advisory board member of the University of Texas at Austin McComb School of Business, a board member of Flatsworthy, a grassroots conservation organization on the Texas coast, and a board member of the Cesar Kleburg Foundation for Wildlife Conservation. We look forward to hearing about your campaign for the office of Land Commissioner. And with that, over to you, Jay.
Great, thanks for having me. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, good.
I'll take that as a yes, great. Well, thanks again for doing this. This is really important. And what I can tell you here on the ground, I was just in Laredo, we were in Eagle Pass prior to that, Uvalde prior to that. I'm in Houston right now. Is the crowds that we're seeing at some of these events for Democratic candidates, the interest that we're seeing is 3, 4, 5 times what we saw even 5 and 6 months ago. So the comment about what we're fighting for in this election, everyone on the ground here in Texas shares. I'll tell you, I'm running for this office because it matters who holds this position. And what was described is a big responsibility. The General Land Office oversees about 13 million acres of public lands. Within that acreage, you've got about 7 million acres in mineral rights, about 1 million acres in fee simple or upland lands out in the Big Bend region, and about 4 million acres off the Texas coast from the coastline out 10 miles. And how we manage those lands and how we generate revenue, which today is about $1 billion, half of which we send to the permanent school fund, is critical, not just to the environment in Texas, but also to the permanent school fund, which is the largest K-12 endowment in the country. It's just north of $50 billion. From 1986 to 2018, that endowment nearly tripled in size, but the inflation adjusted distributions down to the classroom remain flat. What we see in Texas is that we rank 44th in K-12 per pupil spending. And so how not only this office generates funds and distributes it to this endowment, but also ensuring that those funds get down into the classroom is critical. It also oversees the Veterans Land Board, which has 9 veterans homes, which are long-term care facilities for about 1,100 veterans in the state of Texas, 4 veteran cemeteries for those who have had members of served in the armed services that want to put them at rest near their home. We're talking about expanding that, not just to the existing footprint, which is primarily centered around the central part of Texas down to the valley, but also the Panhandle and into Northeast Texas. And one of the things that we've really focused on the last couple of months is the Honoring Our Pact Act, which was finally signed by President Biden here about a month ago. And we went up to Washington with veterans from Texas to fight for the passage of that bill. And ultimately what we see at the General Land Office and the Veterans Land Board is that we could bring what is a registry in the state of Texas for those veterans who were exposed to toxins during their service, in part overseas, but also here in the United States. We have a registry that allows those veterans to establish those conditions and be eligible for benefits through the VA. But the legislature here in Texas, although it established a registry for those veterans, did not fund it. And so we're proposing to fund that registry here in the state of Texas through the Veterans Land Board. We have not had an executive director at the Veterans Land Board, and in a state that has more than 1.5 million veterans, it's critical that we stand up that service. It also provides low interest loans for the purchase of land, homes, and home improvements. We want to expand that and make sure that every veteran in the state of Texas has access to that it's a streamlined process, and have been talking with those who've run this office for the last 4 to 8 years about the improvements that could be made through that program. The last piece, which you mentioned, is the federal natural disaster relief program. So if you think about Hurricane Dolly or Hurricane Ike or Hurricane Harvey, or even the floods in North Texas, if we have a presidentially declared natural disaster in the state of Texas and Congress approves funds, those funds in most cases, the last 10 years, have come to the General Land Office. Today, that's about $8.4 billion, mostly in backlogged funds that not only go back to Hurricane Harvey, but even 10 years in arrears. What we've seen is a disparity in how those funds are being spent to either repair homes, build new homes, or even mitigate against the next natural disaster, specifically in Harris and Jefferson County and Galveston, that those communities have been left behind and underwater, really having suffered a natural disaster since Harvey every single year since then. And so we've got to streamline that process. We have to prepare and plan prior to these natural disasters, because Texas leads the nation in billion-dollar natural disasters. It also has more than 50% of the share of natural disasters. So we should be leading the way in how we prepare for and then ultimately recover, because it's taking up to 5 or 6 years for those funds to flow down from the federal treasury through the General Land Office and get in to people's communities to make sure that they're no longer living in mold infested homes. They're no longer suffering the consequences of flooding. And as you all know, we're seeing an increase in extreme weather, climate change. As I know, I lived abroad for about 3.5 years in the Brazilian Amazon, and we saw through that high rate of deforestation, we saw the annual rainfall drop by about 25% over a couple of decades. And so we're now seeing that at our doorstep. We've got to be prepared for it. And how this office generates its funds and manages land and protects the coast is critical to how not only we prepare for climate change, but also we can invest in both green infrastructure, built infrastructure along the Texas coast, and also pursue opportunities like large-scale carbon storage, where we're taking CO2 emissions off petrochemical plants on the Texas coast and permanently sequestering that carbon, so that we're turning our lead right now in CO2 emissions in the country. Texas leads the nation, not just in energy production, traditional wind, and number 2 in solar, but we also lead the nation in CO2 emissions. So who runs this office is critically important, and it has been used as a political stepping stone for the last 20 years. And my background points to someone who wants to do this job. It's about a $2.9 billion a year budget. And so there's a lot of work to do. And I appreciate you all wanting to hear about the importance of this office. And the last thing I'll say, and then I may go ahead and jump in, either address questions or you all may have already prepared some for me, is this is a statewide office. It is the only open seat of all the statewide positions this fall. And what we're seeing with the candidates and the races above and below me is all of us are within about 2, 3, 4, 5 percentage points of our Republican opponents. And all of us are qualified. All of us are working extremely hard to campaign. And so for the first time in a very long time, you've got a very strong slate up and down the ticket to folks like Michelle Vallejo and Janet Dudding and Susan Hayes and Luke Warford, and obviously Beto at the top. So with that, I'll stop and open it up for questions.
Thank you so much for speaking about your vision, Jay. I had a question. I live in Germany now, but I'm from Houston originally. And so, my question is, as a product myself of the Houston Independent School District, I know the value that quality public education can provide to a community. What will you do as land commissioner to ensure that the permanent school fund meets the needs of every student in Texas public schools and universities? Maybe if you could elaborate a bit on that part of your plan.
Absolutely. So three ways that this position and my vision would impact public schools. As I mentioned, we rank 44th in K through 12 per pupil spending. And so if you look at the contributions to the permanent school fund from the General Land Office over the years, they have not fully committed the $600 million a year that they can send up to the endowment. And so as chair of the school land board, and then as a member of the 9-person panel that is the new Permanent School Fund Investment Corporation, I want to make sure that we're fully funding that the permanent school fund. Secondly, that we're pushing those funds down into the school system. Right now, the public schools are utilizing the funds or the value of the permanent school fund in a couple of ways. One, they're actually getting distributions, which are not based on what we know of other endowments. We are not keeping pace with the distributions that they're producing for their schools. And so I want to make sure that we're putting our full commitment of that those funds that are coming down from the endowment into the K through 12 system. Secondly, we want to make sure that we don't just continue to grow the value of that endowment, that we make sure that we target an amount. If it's $60 billion to keep pace with the ability for public schools to bond against the value of that endowment. Today, it's about $600 billion worth of bonds that are issued every year for schools to be able to build new facilities and infrastructure. We want to make sure that we're targeting a specific amount, because what the legislature has done is they have limited how those schools can actually pass those bonds. They have language that says that even if a bond is not a tax increase, that when it goes before voters, that it says in the language, it must say that this is a tax increase. So while the legislature and the General Land Office have increased the value of that endowment, they've also made it harder for schools to actually bond against it. And so, as you all have probably seen in the coverage of Texas over the last 2 or 3 months, and then obviously over the last few decades, Republicans are trying to starve public schools, and in places like Harris County, and especially in rural parts of the state, there are no other educational options. And so you will see, if we do not turn this around, our school children throughout the state not meeting standards, and frankly, not being prepared to take this state forward. And so I want to make sure that we're utilizing the full force of that endowment for the purpose that it was intended.
Awesome. Jay, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm sorry that we don't have more time. We just wanted to be able to hear from everybody. There are so many amazing candidates. We wish you the best of luck on the road, and we're going to do everything that we can to get you elected in November. And we really look forward
Thank you so
to
much.
that celebration. And thank you so much for spending time with Texans Abroad this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to hand over to Dana, and Dana will introduce our next candidate.
So hi, I'm Dana Freeling. I am a Texas voter, born and bred in Dallas. I am also the chair of Democrats Abroad Global Environment and Climate Crisis Council and the chair of DA Finland, where I reside. As a constituent of Texas' 24th Congressional District, it is my distinct honor to welcome Jan McDowell today to Democrats Abroad. Jan has resided in the Dallas area since early childhood and has served the greater Dallas community throughout her life in multiple organizations. She earned degrees in journalism and public relations from Texas Tech University and worked as a certified public accountant. As a CPA, Ms. McDowell began to analyze more systematically the financial issues associated with the responsible conduct of our government. This experience has highlighted the mechanisms by which people of color and other marginalized communities have been sidelined from the American dream. Two core beliefs form the basis of Jan's approach. First, recognition of the inherent worth and dignity of every person. And second, an understanding that what affects one affects us all. Let's help Jan unseat this insidious Trumpist incumbent now in office. Despite the extensive gerrymandering now in place, I was gerrymandered. Dallas is turning deep blue, and Texas voters abroad can affect change in making the state more equitable, safe, and sustainable. So with that, Jan, we can't wait to hear from you.
Oh, thank you so much, Dana, and good morning, Democrats abroad. I am Jan McDowell, and I'm honored to be the Democratic candidate for Congress in Texas District 24. The district is in the northern areas of Dallas and Tarrant counties. I'm a retired CPA, and I believe that Congress should be making economic opportunities available that will give everyone the opportunity to thrive. That's an advantage to everyone, for as more people thrive, the more they contribute to a vibrant economy. We all do better when we all do better. Right now, American democracy is truly on the line. The Democratic Party is the one that's determined to ensure that it survives. I, and I'm sure the other candidates on this panel, are hoping that you will help from abroad to strengthen Democratic majorities in Washington and to create them in Texas. Along with our democracy is our planet. It's critical now that we act to slow the ravages of climate change. It's not an exaggeration to say that human survival is at stake. Congress needs to codify Roe v. Wade to ensure a woman's right to choose. And America needs to learn from other countries around the world that gun safety measures do indeed work to drastically slow the tragic deaths from gun violence that we in the US are all too familiar with. I will appreciate your vote, and I'll be glad to answer your questions.
Thank you so much, Jan. Actually, we have a really important question. The Kansas referendum showed that there is strong support for protecting abortion rights, even in traditionally red states. What role will reproductive justice play in helping to flip this traditionally red congressional district? You know, how many Highland Park moms are going to flip votes to help protect the rights of their daughters, basically? And what are your plans to motivate swing voters and conservatives to vote for you?
This is such a critical piece of the plan. I've felt the changing winds and tides since Roe v. Wade was overturned. This decision was not even so much about abortion as about choice. Voters across the political spectrum believe that a woman and her doctor must be able to make healthcare decisions without input from the government. National polls have shown that Democrats, as well as independents and even many Republicans, believe that legislatures in red states are going way too far in banning abortion in every or almost every case. Voters have a variety of issues that are important to them. This one is personal to young women, their mothers and grandmothers, and also to their fathers and husbands. Republicans will learn that taking rights away from people is never a smart political move. For decades, Republicans have campaigned and won on the platform of overturning Roe v. Wade. Now that they've actually accomplished that goal, voters are realizing what that really means, and they don't like it. That's what Kansas voters showed us. District 24 is made up of largely suburban areas with a well-educated voter base. Women are politically active, and now they are politically furious. Coupled with the ongoing mass shootings, especially the elementary school shooting in Uvalde, voters will be ready to flip the District 24 seat blue.
So I think we just have time for one more question. The United States is the only developed country in the world that requires its overseas voters to file a tax return both at home and in the countries where we reside. This is complex, costly, and burdensome to everyday Americans living abroad like us. It causes difficulties for us as we try to open bank accounts, access retirement funds, and make financial investments for our future. Can we count on you to work with us and support tax reforms that provide relief to Americans living abroad?
In a word, yes, you can count on me. The biggest problem is that almost every nation in the world taxes people based on their country of residence. The US and Eritrea are the only countries that base taxation on citizenship. That means that as US citizens living abroad, you're required to file and pay taxes in both the US and your country of residence. It's a complicated, expensive process, and it results in paying taxes twice. For the vast majority of the 9 million Americans living abroad who are not extremely wealthy, this is an unfair hardship. There have been several bills passed in the House, but so far they have not passed in the Senate. The process will have to start again with the new Congress in 2023. I will definitely support measures to make things simpler and more fair for Democrats abroad. It goes back to what I first said. We need to give everyone the opportunity to thrive.
Thank you so much, Jan.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Jan. We really appreciate that, and we appreciate your support for Democrats abroad. And once again, we're going to do everything that we can. We know that there are a lot of overseas voters who live in your congressional district, and we really look forward to seeing you go to Congress later this
year. Me too.
Thank you so much, all of you, and that's a good plan.
Awesome. Wonderful, and good luck on the campaign trail. Thank you so much. All right, and now I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Lisa, to introduce our next candidate.
Thank you, Jennifer. Next, we are going to welcome Susan Hayes, who is running for Agricultural Commissioner of the great state of Texas. Susan is a fifth-generation Texan who grew up in Brownswood in the middle of ranching and hunting country, and then went to UT Austin and to Georgetown Law School before starting a career in advocacy. Susan served as a legislative aide at the Texas legislature and clerked at the Texas Supreme Court. She started private practice and co-founded Jane's Due Process, a legal service nonprofit for pregnant minors, as well as writing legal briefs on marriage equality, immigration, and reproductive rights. And she represented Harris County in its efforts to make voting easy and accessible during the pandemic. Her law practice led her into advising cannabis producers and businesses and pushing Texas to open the door to this high value crop and maximize the economic opportunity for Texans. So Susan, we look forward to hearing from you today. The floor is yours.
All right, thank you. As y'all heard, I've had a pretty varied career, and it was the cannabis work that led me to running for this office. I helped draft and pass the law that legalized hemp in Texas in 2019. And through that, the federal law required that the Agriculture Department regulate the program, which had it not, it would have never been given to the incumbent, Sid Miller, because the Republicans in the legislature don't like him and don't trust him. And I found myself in this sort of weird situation where a Tea Party Republican senator staff was asking me, can you help us write safeguards against Sid so he doesn't cheat farmers again and take advantage of them? which I did, and said largely ignored those safeguards. Back at Georgetown, I had the opportunity to work at a law firm that specialized in representing developing countries, and really learned how much corruption destroys an economy and keeps it from growing and keeps a people from prospering. And I saw that unfold before my very eyes with this program. The commissioner's longtime political consultant has now been indicted for trying to sell hemp license that cost $100 for tens of thousands of dollars to the unwitting. And that made me mad enough to run. So that's what brought me from Brownwood to Georgetown to the Capitol to now running for this office. And I understand y'all have some questions for me. Should I just launch into that answer? Would you like to, or you're going to read it first?
I'll go ahead and read it for everyone. So the obvious question with your background would be about hemp legalization and decriminalization, but I feel like that information is pretty accessible for people who want to research your position. We know that you support it, and we support you supporting it. I would rather ask you about your ideas on solutions to the devastating lack of rural healthcare options. Rural hospitals have closed at an alarming rate over the past 2 decades because they're just not profitable. With so many healthcare facilities being run by large corporate entities these days, what does a viable model of rural healthcare look like to you? And how would you approach that issue as Ag Commissioner?
All right, I'll briefly explain why it's relevant to this office. Both rural economic development and the support of rural hospitals is at the Agriculture Commissioner in Texas, which sounds odd, but under the federal level, USDA oversees rural economic development. So a lot of this job is pulling down those federal dollars and implementing them in a way in the state that will be effective. Currently, those programs are rotting in the basement. And I was asked to run for this office last fall, and the question was, or the statement was, hey, Susan, we think you should run for Ag Commissioner. You can talk about legalizing weed. And my response was, I'd rather talk about rural healthcare, but yeah, I can talk about weed too, because I'd come to understand how ineffective the programs were and the mechanisms that are really destroying our rural hospitals. So first and foremost, we need to expand Medicaid. That is what is cutting them off at the financial knees. Second, we need to end redlining of insurance. In a lot of rural communities, there's only one insurance provider. So they get to name their price and they get to name the scope of their coverage within the boundaries of the law. And thirdly, we've got to work hard at recruiting rural healthcare professionals. There aren't enough doctors, nurses, everything in rural Texas. And that's a multi-pronged issue. You've got to recruit rural kids to become nurses, doctors, physicians, assistants. You've got to make sure that our public health medical schools and nursing schools are looking out and preserving slots for those kids and actively recruiting them. And you also have to aggressively train in rural Texas. If you're from rural Texas or educated in rural Texas, you're much more likely to spend your career here. Now, as to the corporate healthcare, I mean, healthcare, like the lights, are something people have to live. And it's been almost completely privatized in many ways, particularly in rural Texas. And I'll take my hometown county hospital as an example. The Brown County Hospital, when I was growing up there, my father was a doctor in the 70s, was community owned. And it didn't have all the bells and whistles and all the fancy machines, but the community really did oversee it. The doctors had a big role in how it was run. In the late 70s, it was privatized. And it's been downhill ever since. Until very recently, it was owned by the Hospital Corporation of America. And my little brother is now a radiologist there. And I sometimes refer to him as my idiot Aggie Republican doctor. But he would complain to me, call me up, furious about something the hospital administrator had done, and yelling about this, quote, communist in Nashville, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, Johnny, the problem isn't they're communist. The problem is that they're capitalist. They're not there to make people healthy or make you happy as a doctor. You're just the labor force. So the government's got to step in and to look at the big picture of rural healthcare. And when I was first launching my campaign and setting up some advisors on that issue, I was speaking to the lobbyist for the family physicians, is a dear friend. And I'll tell you a little bit about this agency. The budget's $700 million. There's 700 employees. 80% of that is Meals on Wheels and food for the food and secure, and also school lunches. So there's really not a lot of money that's discretionary to the commissioner. It's only about $10 million. So I was trying to think, how can I change the world with this little piece that I have power over if I'm elected? And I asked him that, if I just scrape enough money together to hire 5 policy wonks to do nothing but work on this rural healthcare problem, could I make a difference? And his answer to me was 5, try 2. And I said, is no one looking at this? No one in Texas is looking at that big picture, mapping out where do we have good ER services? Because I know farmers and ranchers, people in rural areas are subject to really terrific accidents. Not to mention things like school shooting in Uvalde that came to pass. And he said, no one's doing it. And that gets me to a bigger reason why I wanted to run for this office and why we have to win in November. The Republicans in power don't even care to govern. They're not interested in whether things work. And I didn't understand, again, how bad that was until I got back to Austin and was lobbying and trying to work across the aisle with some Republican lobbyists and members. All they care about is the next election. They're ruling by soundbite and poll results. And whether people live or die as a result, they've shown again and again, whether it was the grid and the freeze, the pandemic, or the reaction to the shooting in Uvalde, that they don't care. So absolutely need y'all's help to help us win in November.
Well, that is our goal. We have time for one more question. What do you see as the greatest challenges for Texas farmers and ranchers due to the effects of climate change? It's been a crazy summer.
Yes, it has.
And what can the Ag Department do to help them be better prepared?
Okay, it's water. There's either too little or too much. And, I've been watching here at the end of August, when a drought breaks, it breaks too hard with too much rain. And it's, we've seen that now. 8 migrants died in Eagle Pass yesterday because of flooding in the river, where the river was dry upstream in the Big Bends just a few weeks ago, now that we've had some rains. And I'll contrast this with the powers of the office Jay's running for. The Land Commission has a lot of power, almost absolute power over public lands. As Ag Commissioner, I have the power of persuasion over privately held lands, and leading by example and leading by model to encourage our farmers and ranchers to engage in better practices. And that is regenerative agriculture, meaning agriculture that brings back land that's wasted, sustainable agriculture, agriculture that doesn't damage land going forward. Because if you or overgrazing, if you're overusing water, you start a death spiral on your local land. And that in turn helps worsen the effects of too much heat and climate change. So that's absolutely going to be a big piece of what I do as the Ag Commissioner, is remind everybody what they learned in elementary school about the Dust Bowl, and that we have to be smarter about how we're using land in Texas and our aquifers and access to water in farm communities.
It's so scary. I'm from Emily, and so just your neck of the woods, and spend a lot of time in the woods. So we saw it this summer, and how frustrated everyone was and how scared they are. So we really appreciate you running for this office, and we know how important it is, and we really are going to do all that we can to get you elected. Susan, thank you so much for coming to join us today. We appreciate your time. We appreciate you thinking about Texans abroad and knowing that we're out there, and we're going to do what we can, and we look forward to you winning this election in November. And good luck on the road. Thank you so much. All right, and now I'm going to hand it over to our next candidate to be introduced by Susan. Go ahead, Susan, take it away.
Hi, I'm Susan McKinley. I am a native of and a steadfast voter in Houston. At the moment, I'm sitting in Poole, our holiday home in the south of England, and there's an air show going on, so we're not being strafed if you hear something. I'd like to introduce Janet Dudding. She's a CPA. She's a Hurricane Katrina survivor who moved to Texas a year after Katrina devastated the Mississippi Gulf Coast. And they moved so that her spouse could join the faculty of Texas A&M Civil Engineering Department in the Coastal and Environmental Division. Janet's got deep ancestral roots in Texas, and she has immersed herself in local and state life. And she's going to try to apply her wonderful skills and dedication to a government that's accountable to the people and serve Texas as State Comptroller. It's my pleasure to introduce Janet.
Thank you very much. I'm sitting here in Pasadena, Texas, just south of Houston, one of the areas that is vulnerable if we were to have another Harvey or to have a direct hit from another hurricane, and we know they're coming. There's actually Dolores that's coming in somewhere, so we're gonna get some rain sometime or another. I got my raincoat here. I'm Janet Dudding. I am a certified public accountant, but I'm a different kind of CPA. I am a governmental CPA. My first job out of school was actually investigating allegations that elected officials had embezzled taxpayer money or had taken kickbacks. I helped lay the groundwork in Mississippi for Operation Pretense, which put over 50 corrupt politicians in prison for procurement fraud. I have spent my whole life in state and local government, holding government accountable to people as opposed to special interests. And yes, climate change is real personal to me. When you live through one of those storms, it changes your fiber. We're number one in the nation for climate caused disasters. Texas has more than anybody else in the nation, and they cost billions of dollars, and that's just the dollars and cents. That doesn't affect the physical, the personal, the human cost of these things. So yes, climate change is the reason I'm running. Yeah, I'm a governmental CPA. Yeah, I've done all this stuff. Yeah, I've spent my life doing it, but it's the climate change and the chance to do something on climate change with the Comptroller's office. That's the reason I'm running. The Comptroller is over the State Energy Conservation Office, which oversees renewable energy and alternative fuels. And we are right now at the cusp of being able to do some really, really innovative things here in Texas. We're number one in the world in oil and gas. So we're really smart in oil and gas. We're number one in the nation in wind. We're getting there in solar. We haven't even touched geothermal. With the infrastructure money coming down, we've got the opportunity to make some real impact. And that's what I'm interested in doing. I'm not going to take any more time talking about me. I would rather get to your questions.
Great. Well, I was going to ask you what the Comptroller can do about climate change, because you'd mentioned that to me before, and you've touched on that. Is there anything else that you would like to explain about how that position directly affects climate change?
Just quote unquote, just SECO, just that State Energy Conservation Office is pretty big. It has capacity to help state and locals tighten the envelope. If we could expand that to be able to partner with residents here in Texas to tighten their envelope, because right now there's no vehicle for residentials to tighten their envelope to make their homes more energy efficient. But just the SECO, just the being the incubator for renewable energy for alternative fuels. I sit on the committee with TxDOT to develop where the charging stations will be. I'm very interested in looking at bi-directional electric vehicles. From what I understand, we've got 2 times the amount of renewable storage just running around in Nissan Leafs, which is not the most popular electric vehicle here. But just in Nissan Leafs, it's the only electric vehicle that's got bi-directional right now. Ford Lightning is coming out. I think there's about 10 or 11 more coming out onto the market this year. But if we can harness that, we can not only provide some relief for residential, because if they buy a car like I buy a car, I buy it over time. And by the time I own the car, I also own a battery. So the whole idea, and if you drive like my husband drives, if you drive like a statewide candidate, you're never getting out of the car. This is my normal living room now, and warehouse and office and blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But if you drive like my husband drives, if you drive from the house to campus and park, and then from campus to the house and parks, he is a prime candidate for having a bi-directional electric vehicle. He could actually fuel either the house, the utility, the grid when he plugs in at 5 o'clock when there's the surge, not surge, but where there's a peak in demand, and then pull a current overnight. So there's a lot of innovation that we're ready for. I think that the State Energy Conservation Office is uniquely positioned to take a role in that. I also sit on the SWIFT, on the State Water IFT. It's water infrastructure, water finance, and renewable energy uses zero water. So back to what Susan was touching on, water is the most important economic asset that we have. You can't drink oil. You need oil, but you can't drink oil. You need water to live. And renewable energy doesn't use water, which makes it attractive.
Janet, we're all sitting in different countries. And one thing that we all see consistently in the media is how divided the country is. And we hope that all the Democrat sweep the offices in Texas. But in the case that doesn't happen and you get in, how would you work with a mixed partisan situation to achieve some of the goals that we all support?
From my perspective, it's all dollars and cents. And I've worked in government. I've never wanted to be a politician until things got all upside down after 2016. I never wanted to be a politician, but I've worked with politicians for the last 35 years, for my entire career. It's all dollars and cents. So you appeal to that dollars and cents and meeting their core constituents' goals with those dollars and cents, and stretch those. You stretch the resources as far as you can. But again, it all goes down to dollars and cents and how to best spend that money. And that's where you build the bridges. Because you can meet this person's goals and this person's goals with the same project in a lot of different circumstances. And that's not to say that we can rule out all manner of reproductive or female or one certain type of healthcare as we're building in the other healthcare. I'm not going there, but what we can do is we can build the economy in rural Texas with expanding Medicaid. We can expand jobs with expanding Medicaid. We can expand opportunity costs with Medicaid. So it's building all of those things together at the same time. So I hope I helped. I know I brought in the fact that right now, as I travel across Texas, every time I talk, I hear a story of a woman in the middle of a miscarriage who is being denied health care until she gets to be at life's door, until it becomes a question of life and death before medical attention can step in. And that's just, it's barbaric. So forgive me for jumping in there, but that bothers me so much. It's just barbaric. We've got to do something.
I mean, for those of us living abroad, it's so important, even when it's hard to hear what's going on back home, because we have to vote, and we need that extra incentive and motivation just to really go out and make sure that everybody we know is going to send back their ballots. Janet, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for running for comptroller. Good luck on the road, and we wish you all the best. And
no, thank you very much. I watched Katrina hit from Delft, so we were in the Netherlands. We were actually abroad watching that storm land on top of us. So yeah, thank y'all for all y'all do. Please get the word out and get out the vote.
Thank you so much.
Bye, y'all.
Stay safe in that car. Thank you so much.
Bye.
All right, we're now going to turn over to our next candidate. And Mike, I'm going to ask you just to do the next introduction.
Good morning. Thanks everybody for coming. I'm Michael Sump. I spent 25 years with Texas Instruments while living in suburban Dallas. I now vote in Polk County while living in Guadalajara, where I'm the National Membership Chair for Democrats Abroad Mexico. I'm responsible for volunteers and the organization along the border. So it's my pleasure to introduce Michelle Vallejo. She's a bright new voice in Texas politics. She graduated from Mission High School in Hidalgo County and Columbia University in New York City. That in itself, Mission to Columbia, represents a breadth of life's experiences. After graduation, she returned to South Texas to work in her family's business and to promote entrepreneurship and small business in the Rio Grande Valley. Her campaign is focused on business and economic development and better health care, especially for women. Her roots in South Texas and in northern Mexico run deep, and I'm honored to introduce her to you. Hello, Michelle.
Hello. Thank you, Michael. Buenos días a todos. Calling in here from the border of South Texas and Mexico. Hello to all the Democrats abroad. I've been so excited to speak with y'all. I met some Democrats from this organization in Dallas at the state convention. Dana was one of them. And it's just, the energy is palpable right now in Texas and in South Texas. There is this urgent cry to stand up and to fight for our rights, our liberties, our democracy, our country. And it hasn't been, well, it gets clearer and clearer to me every day on this campaign trail how critical it is for Texas 15 to stay blue and for me to be in this fight and to beat my opponent. Just a little background on myself. I am a daughter of Mexican immigrants, come from a very, very big family of farm workers, of entrepreneurs, and I grew up at the Pulga, which is what we call flea markets in this part of our state, which are full of culture and love and fun, but also an opportunity where families who are so neglected and ignored by systems that should be in place to provide us the opportunity to live the highest quality of lives are not in place for South Texans. And I've grown up since I was 6 or 7 years old, working with my family and working with other very, very hardworking families. And I've seen how hard it is just to get by. It's not just in this period of inflation that we're all experiencing in this pandemic / post-pandemic reality. It's just been the situation that South Texas has not received the help, the resources, the national attention, in particular from our federal government, in order to live the best possible lives we could live. And so for me in this race, it has been a beautiful experience in the sense that I've been able to connect with community members throughout our entire district, which runs from McAllen, Texas, that's our most southern point, all the way to Guadalupe County, and Seguin is actually our most northern port of our district. And so our community is wide and diverse, and we have different experiences and different needs and perspectives. And I love that my experience truly stems from the work at the Pulga, because there we just, we work side by side and we figure it out. We work hard, we learn to negotiate, we learn how to look past our differences in places where we disagree to find a common ground of respect and of love, because we truly are driven to create a better life for our children and to care for our elderly, which we all respect and hope to see, a beautiful life every single day. So what has happened in Texas 15 is that all eyes have turned to us as a marker of what to expect during these national elections coming up in November 8th. Texas 15 is the #1 most competitive congressional seat in the state of Texas, and it's top 5 most competitive nationwide to hold on to the House majority. My opponent, who is an endorsed candidate, an endorsed Latina by Trump, which would seem like an oxymoron, but unfortunately, sometimes I speak with people and it's like, yes, it's like living in the Twilight Zone. I would have never thought that this would have been the situation. But what is also very beautiful about my candidacy and this experience and this moment in American politics and in South Texas politics is that me having come this far in this race and even jumping in the first place is a testament of community organizing and community member efforts to drive change forward and to create a better life for ourselves without waiting for anyone else to come do it for us or take advantage of us for their own benefit. And due to redistricting, we lost our would have been incumbent Democratic Representative, Congressman Vicente Gonzalez. And that really did trigger a search. It was just weeks before our filing deadline back in December 13th here in Texas. where there was an organizing effort to find someone in the community that would be viable as a candidate and ready to jump in, ready to fight for South Texas. And I really dove into focusing on my community and working at the Pulga and working with my family. And there's a saying that I like to share that has really allowed me to dive even deeper into who I am, my culture, my identity, to enact change. And that is, mucha gente pequeña en lugares pequeños, haciendo cosas pequeñas, pueden cambiar el mundo. And that translated is so many small people in small places doing small things can change the world. And I truly believe that this is the way that we're going to win this seat, by everyone doing their small part, or, you know, in some of us, it's a much larger part and role we're playing in these elections, but making sure that you are registered to vote, making sure that you know what your plan is to vote, to make sure that that vote is counted, because we also know in Texas that our vote has been extremely disenfranchised due to policies that came into effect already after efforts in order to, you know, make sure candidates don't have that much of a challenge sometimes in some races, which is ridiculous, right? This is a democracy. We should empower every single voter for them to be informed as much as possible, to make the choice that they believe is right for them. Something alarming that I discovered and learned on this campaign trail is that during our primary election, about 40% of mail-in votes and mail-in ballots were disqualified from Hidalgo County, which is the largest voting block for this race, and that is criminal. And those are the things that we're fighting for in this election. While we really do need to push policy, now we have we are aware of what power we have in our hands, and for that reason, I am traveling up and down our district to talk with every voter, not just Democrats, because there are people who have felt disengaged from the electoral process to where they don't show up to vote. And that is one problem that we have in South Texas. And I believe in Texas is that it's a non-voting state. You know, there are so many people who are registered. And I believe our meeting here is a resistance to that, is countering that. You know, even if we are Democrats from Texas all across the world, we're still going to put in the effort to make sure that our value and our vote is counted. But just to, I guess, paint a picture of what this race looks like right now, my opponent, like I said, is endorsed by Trump, has millions of outside interest money and corporate interest behind that candidate, and they're driving this narrative that South Texas is a place of chaos overrun by cartel, and that the solution we need is to build a wall. And I live in this region. I was born and raised in this region. I work hard with my community here, and that is not what we need. That's not a good investment of support and attention, and that, quite frankly, isn't what we live every single day. You know, we're proud, hardworking families, and we have a beautiful home that we are here to stand up for and to defend. And just as you've heard from our state candidates here, you know, we're in this fight to represent Texans, to represent the people. A large part of my community is in rural Texas. And I know that Mal Torres is on this call, who's our Democratic Party chair over in Live Oak in Three Rivers, one of the places that a lot of people want to look past because they believe there's not enough Democrats that are registered there. But I tell Mal, you know, my heart is in Three Rivers because that is the first stop that I made on my campaign trail. And I love to share it with everyone because that's how we create change. And that's how Texas 15 is going to win this race, because we don't look past any single person. And what's been amazing is that while we've been having conversations about fighting for a woman's right to make her own choices with dignity for what's best for her health and her family, and I adamantly stand by access to abortion care as access to healthcare, which is a fundamental human right. We've been connecting with people who they thought they were pro-life. But when asked, would you support abortion care in a situation or instance of rape, incest, or when a mom's life is in danger, they said, yeah, absolutely. And, we're informing people that means you're pro-choice. That means that you would allow for there to be a right for a woman to protect herself in a situation where her life is on the line. And so we've been informing voters across the lines about what truly is at stake and why there's millions and millions of dollars being poured into this district to paint our home in a way that is not the reality, to benefit my opponent so that the radical right Republicans could have deeper inroads in our state and in our region to do what they wish. It's so true that our Republican electeds in office right now, most of them, at least the ones that we see getting the most attention, are looking just to create another talking point with our region. They use South Texas and our border, unfortunately, as a political football, but I know exactly how that translates. That creates fear amongst my community, that creates division. And right now, what we need more than ever is for our community members to come together and to fight for our lives, because that, quite frankly, is what is at stake here. So thank you so much for joining on this call and for hearing us out. I really want to invite as many people as possible to our effort, to Team Vallejo, to make sure that we hold this seat, we get the right person in Congress who could speak truth to power and truth of what we're truly living in South Texas. And I know that I got introduced from someone over in Mexico, and me da muchísimo orgullo representar mis raíces mexicanas también. I love that I get to lean deeper into my culture, my identity, who I am, and where I come from every step of the way, because there's no other choice. There's no other choice but to just have dignity and pride in what I'm doing and what I represent already for my home.
Michelle, I just love your positivity and your energy. You are going to be a great Congresswoman.
Oh.
So first the question. So from the 2020 Mexican census, we know that in the state of Tamaulipas, right across from you in Mexico, there are over 61,000 residents who were born in the U.S. and as U.S. citizens have a right to vote in U.S. elections. There's another 45,000 in Nuevo León and Coahuila. Looking toward the 2024 presidential election, and incidentally, your re-election campaign, might you have ideas about how Democrats abroad Mexico can help get them interested and motivated to register and vote?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it connects directly and goes hand in hand with our efforts in trying to connect and broaden our electorate base in South Texas and in Texas 15. And that's communicating with each other in the way that we speak. Make sure that we have our hands involved in every communications possible in order to engage our bilingual Spanish dominant families. I think that one tactic in disenfranchising voters, in particular in South Texas, and I would say, our Democrats who are living in Mexico, is to not communicate in Spanish, not to communicate in a bilingual way. So I have fought every step, to communicate my message and to speak in English and in Spanish and a little bit Tex-Mex, because that's how we speak here. Así hablamos, you'll throw in a word here and there, because that's just how we communicate and how we learn to trust each other. And I think we have to reinvigorate the trust that people have in their elected officials and leaders that are asking for their vote in order to represent them. And I think when connecting and communicating with our voters in Mexico, it's, like I said, leaning into our culture, not being afraid, not being ashamed of the fact that the fabric of America is changing, and we need to represent that. We need to reflect that and be a representative of the things that we love and that we admire and that truly look and sound the way that we do. And so I think it's also important to invest in these communications, be it by mail, by TV, by radio, by digital communications, to reach those people who have never felt any effort to be communicated to. But I also think it's important to open channels of back and forth communication so that we could hear what are the challenges or what are the perceptions when it comes to, our Democrats abroad living in Mexico, who might feel like they are too separated from their home country, too separate and far from the local elections or federal elections that ultimately will end up making decisions that deeply impact them and their quality of life as well.
Thank you so much for that. Jennifer, do we have time for another question, or?
If you do, Michelle, we'd love to ask you one more question.
Okay, let's go. Let's do it.
Okay, Michelle, this is actually a repeat question. It's similar to the one that Dana asked earlier. It's about taxes, and this is a big issue for us living overseas. So we have to, file a tax return in the States and also in Mexico. It's complicated. It's a real burden, and it also causes problems with bank accounts and retirement funds and our access. Can we count on you to work with us to support tax reforms that provide relief to Americans abroad?
Absolutely. And I love that we are building this relationship at this point, because it has directed me to do my homework in the way that's most effective. And, I've started to learn about the House American Abroad Caucus, which is who I could work with specifically in order to drive policy that's already supported by the House, and that we need to make sure gets pushed past the Senate to make sure that, our Americans abroad don't get docked for having to pay double taxation, and also for them to simplify the way that you make your tax filings. And there are a few acts that have been passed, or policies that have been passed the House. For example, there's the Overseas America's Financial Access Act, and then there's another the Commission on America's Living Abroad Act that would definitely simplify tax filings and make sure that those who receive benefits from their foreign countries aren't getting docked twice. And these are just a few simple things that I think could get passed and enacted, and make sure that we are, as representatives in Congress, are in deep and close communication with our Americans who are living abroad, so that it's not just a talking point, and it's not just something that passes the House, but also passes the Senate and trickles down to make sure that that benefit is as immediate as possible, since we already know that our Americans abroad are getting disincentivized, to do the right thing.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming to speak to us today, Rochelle. It was great to get to meet you in person in Dallas, and your energy is just contagious, and that's what we need. And we are going to fight like crazy to get you into Congress. We know how close it's going to be, and we know that every single vote is going to matter. And so you'll be watching for those votes coming in the week after the election, and that'll be our votes that hopefully will put you over the top. And good luck on the road. Good luck with your campaign, and we cannot wait to see you celebrate that victory in November. And
thank you, Jennifer.
Look forward to working together with you in the future.
Bye, everyone. Si se puede.
And it is my great pleasure then to turn over and to Robin to welcome our next candidate. And Robin, I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jennifer. Good day, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, Texans abroad around the world. My name is Robin Emerson. I am the chairperson of Democrats Abroad in Kenya. I vote from Austin, Texas, and Travis County, and I am extremely proud to be here amongst other Texans. Let's see here. So Rochelle, really glad to have you here with us. Thank you so much for coming. Rochelle is running for the office of Texas Attorney General against the infamous Ken Paxton. Rochelle is a fronteriza and a lifelong fighter for the border communities of the Rio Grande Valley in Texas. She believes that it doesn't matter who you are or where you live, everyone deserves a fair shot to get ahead. As a lawyer, Rochelle has fought for the people, serving Texas and championing children, immigrants, and working families who too often find themselves being the victims of the powerful. Rochelle has taken on Donald Trump, Ken Paxton, and Brett Kavanaugh when they tried to prevent an immigrant teen, Jane Doe, from exercising her right to choose. And Rochelle won. Her work on that case resulted in her right to choose, resulted in the Garza notice, which requires detained teens to be notified of their right to abortion free of retaliation and obstruction by the federal government. Rochelle fought against Donald Trump's devastating zero tolerance immigration policies of family separation, denial of access to the ports of entry for the asylum-seeking families and individuals, and restriction of reproduction rights for unaccompanied minors. As the Attorney General, Rochelle will use her legal expertise in immigration, family, and criminal law to fight for Texas families. And Rochelle, I just have to tell you that I worked under and in the era of Jim Maddox and Dan Morales. And I am so excited to possibly have another human rights, civil rights loving lawyer in that seat, which is so critical to the state of Texas. So Rochelle, welcome.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I'm really excited to be here with all of you. I'm calling from the road. I am in Laredo on my way up on a tour of South Texas. So I'm Rochelle Garza. I am the Attorney General candidate for the Democratic Party. I'm originally from Brownsville, Texas, as you heard, a fifth generation Texan from there. I'm a new mom. I had a baby in the course of this election. She is now 5 months old. And I'm running against criminally indicted Ken Paxton. I'm doing this because I want to fight for our families and for our children, because we have someone in this office that does not concern themselves with the people of Texas and with the families of Texas. So if I know we went through kind of my background a little bit, but I'm very proud of my work because it is based in the belief that no one, no matter how powerful, is above the law, and no one, no matter how humble, is beneath its protection. That's why I've taken on the fights I've taken on, fighting for Jane Doe, who was a 17-year-old teen denied access to abortion care. She was the most vulnerable of the vulnerable, and being able to stand up for her and for every other teen in immigration detention that found themselves in that situation was an incredible feat. We were able to beat Donald Trump, we were able to beat Ken Paxton, and we were able to beat Brett Kavanaugh in that case. And the Garza notice is still standing today, even though Roe has now fallen, and choice, especially in Texas, is no longer an option. So I'm running for this office to protect families, to stop what Ken Paxton is doing, to restore access to abortion care, because this office is incredibly powerful. Ken Paxton has used it to harm people. He used it to try to overturn the 2020 election. He used it to try to take away healthcare from millions of people, just in Texas, but across the country. And he used it to prevent doctors providing life-saving abortion care to women in emergency situations in Texas and across the country. He is dangerous for democracy, and he's dangerous to the people of Texas, and we need to vote him out. So the good news here is that we are in the closest statewide election. We have the Democrat win for 30 years. I am within 2 points of unseating Ken Paxton. And there are a number of independents that are seeing who he is and not liking that, because they don't want to have the top law enforcement officer under criminal indictment for more than 7 years. And they're moving away from him. He has the lowest approval ratings. His ratings are at about 40%. That means he does not have enough to get him over the 50% threshold. So my job as a campaign, as a candidate for this office, is to make sure that we are communicating with people across the state of Texas, letting them know that Ken Paxton is bad for Texas and that we can have a brighter future. We can have an attorney general who is going to look out for our families and our children, who's going to do all the bread and butter issues, like making sure child support is paid, making sure that people have their civil rights protected. I want to have a fully funded civil rights division that is going to protect the safety, the dignity, and privacy of every single Texan. I want to make sure we're holding bad actors to account. That means price gougers, insurance companies that don't deliver what they promise, because this is how you help ordinary families get ahead, is by holding power to account. And I want to make sure we have accountability for what happened with the power grid failure, because everyone in the state is now experiencing higher energy costs because of it. So we can have a people's lawyer in the Office of Attorney General with your support. And I'm so grateful to be here. And I have a big vision for this office, and we can do it together. I know that we can. We can close that gap and we can win in November. So I'm happy to answer any questions you all may have at this time.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful, Rochelle. Thank you very much for those inspiring words. You know, I actually worked in the child support division for several years, and it's so critical, that lawyer, having somebody that's in there fighting for Texas families. And I'm so excited about you possibly coming in there and picking up that fight and defending. And Rochelle, just like Texas women, we don't watch problems around us, we run in. And just like in Austin, Texas, at the corner of 6th and Congress, there is a statue regarding Angelina Eberly, the woman that went in and fought right inside of that war. And so, Rochelle, you are right there inside of that great stead of great women in Texas. So Rochelle, we'd like to ask you a couple of questions. And that Texas in the 2020 race was even considered the bastion of voter suppression. Texas during that time. We remember seeing people from the Harris County, Fort Bend County, having to go various miles to go and drop off their ballots. Like have, you know, elderly, people with disabilities not being able to exercise their right of a local convenient way of voting. And those recent voter suppression rules are making it harder and harder for voters to register and to have their ballots counted, including us. Those of us that are living outside of the Republic of Texas and are living in various other places around the world are finding it more difficult and more arduous to get our ballots in and be counted. This added burden comes on top of the already complex process of registering, returning ballots from around and across the globe. So Rochelle, I want to ask you, what can you do as the Texas Attorney General to help protect and to help improve the right to vote, including our ability to vote from overseas? As you very well know, in the last presidential election, it was our votes that came in that continued to see that it was critical. They rang in, and they were a critical, divisive factor for candidates to win. So we want to hear from you, Rochelle. What would you do?
So as a starting point, the Office of Attorney General is an independent executive position. It has separate constitutional powers than any of the other executive, like the governor, the lieutenant governor, any of these other positions. Has the authority and the ability to protect people independently of the legislature and what the legislature is doing. The office has investigatory powers and litigation powers and opinion issuing powers. I will use this office with the full intention of ensuring we are protecting the right to vote. I mentioned my civil rights division earlier. I want to make sure that voting rights is a component of that division. So I have a vision of a division with units underneath them, and voting rights is one of those. Now, there are a lot of suppression tactics, not just the ones that you have named. late last year, we saw a number of people receiving uncertified mail letters saying, if you do not respond to this letter and confirm that you are a citizen, then you are being pulled off the voter registration roll. There were about 2,400 people that were pulled off the voter registration rolls. We're talking about people that had been consistent voters for years, citizens for even longer than that. And all of that came from the Texas Secretary of State. They were identifying people, and the elections officers across the state and in each county were enacting what they were being told to do. So that's a tactic that we're seeing happen. You know, Paxton is using his office in particular to, he's got this quote unquote voter integrity unit that is really about suppressing the vote. And he's used millions and millions of dollars through this project of his, and has only closed a few cases, but most of the people he's going after are people of color. So, you know, that's something that I would dismantle immediately and make sure that we're not doing that. And the last thing I'll touch on is the fact that Paxton actually issued a legal opinion from his office to all of the elections officials in each county, saying anyone who requests to see the ballots, including after the day of the election, should be allowed to do so. And this is in violation of state and federal law that requires that those ballots be held in confidential conditions for 22 months. So these tactics are going to continue, and it's now coming from within the Office of Attorney General. And it's the stakes cannot be higher. I know everyone says that every single election, but this is the election. I mean, Joe Biden just gave a speech about this, but this is what's at stake, not just in Texas and across the country. But I will use all of the power of this office to make sure that we are respecting people's civil rights and especially the right to vote.
Great, we're behind you. Hand it over to my colleague. Go ahead.
Thanks. Thanks so much, Rochelle. My name is Haley. I'm a member of Democrats Abroad in France. I just wanted to see if you have time for one more question, if we could ask, and if not, we can move to the next candidate if you're busy.
No, we could do one more question. That works.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I was keen to hear a bit more about your plan of action in regard to restoring reproductive rights. As you mentioned, that's a big priority of your campaign, and particularly if that will be through that civil rights division that you mentioned, or otherwise, kind of just what is your plan of attack there?
So as I mentioned earlier, that this is the Office of Attorney General has independent constitutional powers. And again, it has the power to litigate, to not litigate. And those are and issue opinions, right? Legal opinions that can bind agencies within the state of Texas. My commitment is to working towards restoring access as much as I can. That means partnering with district attorneys that are not going to prosecute people within their counties for providing abortion access. Just to back up a little bit and be very clear with where we're at, the trigger ban has gone into effect, and abortion is criminalized in Texas. You cannot get an abortion in Texas. Whether it doesn't matter if you've been raped, it doesn't matter if it was a result of incest, it doesn't matter how young you are. And it really doesn't matter if your life is in danger, because as I mentioned, Ken Paxton litigated and won a temporary injunction to stop doctors from providing life-saving care. It's a very, very dire situation. And I would use the office to, one, pull out of the litigation that he has initiated. And if it's too late to do that, because he's already set this in motion and it's going to go to the Fifth Circuit and then it's going to go up to the Supreme Court, I will use other creative ways to restore access as much as possible. That means partnering with district attorneys. That means partnering with organizations and counties and cities across the state to not only work towards decriminalizing, but towards restoring access to basic healthcare around these issues. There's a lot that can be done with this office, and I am fully committed towards restoring abortion access in the state and using every power of this seat to do that.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I think the role really encapsulates some of the most crucial aspects of, kind of what needs to be done in the next few years. So thank you so much for taking the time to be with us, and best of luck with the rest of your campaign, and we'll be rooting for you from afar. Thank you so much, Rochelle.
Well, thank you all for being so engaged, and I just appreciate it so much. I appreciate what you're doing. So you all take care of yourselves. Bye.
Thank you. Great. Well, we've got a few more minutes left, and our last candidate can't be here today, but I'll give a quick introduction and then pass it over to Jennifer as he shared a video to describe his campaign more. So Luke Warford is running for the Texas Railroad Commission. He's a former Texas Democrat abroad, and Luke is running, as I mentioned, for the position of Railroad Commissioner, which has a wide range of roles that it plays in Texas government beyond the traditional understandings of the Texas railroads. And so Luke has a master's in development policy from the London School of Economics, and his professional background is in economics and policy. He worked on the 2012 Obama campaign, and his current platform is focused on reforming the Texas Railroad Commission, particularly following Winter Storm Uri in 2021. He's got a few different approaches to doing that, including creating weatherization standards and investing in renewables to reduce emissions to keep Texan energy relevant on local and international markets. Interestingly, Luke is the youngest statewide Democratic candidate in over 30 years in Texas. And as I mentioned, he can't be here today, but Jennifer, I believe you have a video that you can share, and he'll be here for an event in the coming weeks.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Haley, for that. Luke really does send his regrets and that he's unable to attend today, but you are going to have the opportunity to meet him in person at our upcoming Democrats Abroad Delivering a Democracy Ballot Day Marathon, which is going to be happening on September 24th. And that is the day that our ballots will be arriving. And we've got an amazing range of speakers who are going to come and help us to celebrate getting our ballots and voting in this ever so important election. So please watch for that invitation. It'll be coming out in the next few days. And Luke was going to record a personalized message just for us Texans abroad, but he has been really tied up on the campaign trail. So we're going to be listening to his really energizing speech from the Texas Democratic Convention. It was just on a side note that you've heard that Dana and I were there at the Democratic Convention this year in Dallas and represented Texans abroad and really spread the word about the importance of our constituency. And so I could hear the speech a second time around. It was great the first time, and I'm glad to get to share it with you today. And just thank you again for sticking with us and listening to all these phenomenal candidates.
Truly. My name is Luke Warford, and I am your nominee for the Texas Railroad Commission. Exactly. Thank you so much to the party, our convention co-chairs, and the city of Dallas for hosting us this weekend. I'm honored to be with you here tonight with so many people I've met while working at the party or running this year. Now, I know y'all know the Railroad Commission, especially if you're still here, has nothing to do with railroads, and that it actually regulates the Texas oil and gas industry. But I'm required to say, if you want to learn more, my website does have a bunch of information about my platform and experience in business, economics, and clean energy. But that's not what I want to talk about tonight, because many of y'all know me by now, and all of the candidates you heard from have incredibly impressive careers and compelling stories. I'm 32 years old. the youngest Democrat to run statewide in more than 30 years. And I'm running because I'm sick and tired of watching the people in power run our state into the ground. Right now, for so many of my generation, your kids and grandkids, despite all of the progress we've made, developments in science and technology, it feels like things are actually getting worse, not better. And there is no better example than last February's grid failure. As a show of hands, how many of y'all lost power during last February's winter storm? A lot of y'all, right? And what was that like? You can shout it out. I think it was bad. I'm going to summarize and say that it was bad. In every room I'm in, whether it's Democrats, Republicans, or independents, I ask the same question and I get the same response. Because it shouldn't be a partisan issue whether or not we can keep the lights on. Texas is the energy capital of the world. From oil and gas to wind, solar, geothermal, and hydrogen, we can produce more energy than any other state. So why is it that, as we've seen again this week, our grid is constantly on the edge of collapse? It's sad, it's frustrating, it's wrong. But one thing it's not is surprising. Because you can cheer for that. Because Republicans, like my opponent, Wayne Christian, have had it easy their whole careers. Showing up, smiling for the camera, shamelessly taking campaign contributions from the folks they're supposed to regulate. One company literally gave Wayne Christian $100,000 in exchange for approving a project that would threaten the groundwater for 20 million people. But they don't do their jobs. They don't look out for you. The same is true on emissions. Texas is the largest greenhouse gas emitter in the country because the Texas Railroad Commission can't be bothered to enforce the existing rules. I don't know about you, but I'm sick of getting push notifications about Joe Manchin. We don't have to wait on Washington to make progress on climate. We can lower our emissions by winning this race right here in Texas. And electricity prices. We are the energy capital of the world, but right now you're paying more because Wayne Christian is in the pocket of the pipelines and stuck you with $3.4 billion in costs from last February's winter storm. Yeah, I like that. Well, we don't have to take it anymore. As Democrats, we know that results matter, that getting things done, delivering for people, and following through on our commitments matters. That's why we need to kick Wayne Christian and Ken Paxton and Dan Patrick and Greg Abbott out of office in November. Now, I want y'all to take a minute and think back to the grid failure last February. To the dark, the cold, the uncertainty. To parents trying to feed their kids with refrigerators full of spoiled food, and folks whose medical devices wouldn't work in the cold. Families across our state are still dealing with the property damage, and 700 Texans literally froze to death. You shouldn't have to live in fear that the grid is going to fail every time it's too hot or too cold. Because there are other fights that we need to focus on, where folks like Beto and Mike and Rochelle and Susan are leading the charge. And when I'm your Texas Railroad Commissioner, you won't have to. Thank you all so much for having me. Thank you especially to the crew down in front. Please go to lukewarford.com to sign up to volunteer.
Very good. Thank you so much for listening to Luke. He is really a great personality, and I wish he could have been here with us today, but we will get to see him soon. And we just appreciate everyone coming to this event to hear from these outstanding candidates and that they took their time to answer questions. We appreciate all of the candidates for recognizing the importance of Texans abroad. And on that note, please do remember that all U.S. citizens abroad can register to vote at votefromabroad.org. You must do that every calendar year. And our ballots will be arriving on September 24th. So you want to go ahead and get set to vote today and make sure that all of your friends and family are ready to go as well. We would just challenge you to find 3, 5, 10 people you know who live abroad and not just share this information with them, but really sit down and have a conversation with them. Ask them if they know how to vote from abroad, if they've done it before, and just to really make sure that they've got a plan. And we don't want to leave any votes on the table this year. In closing, I would like to give a huge shout out to our phenomenal volunteers, both on camera. We have some amazing, these are all Texans today. We have some amazing Texans living across the globe, and it is a real pleasure to know them and to be able to work with them, and on camera and also behind the scenes. And thank you again to our participants for taking time to listen in and get excited to help turn Texas blue. Watch for a link for the recording in the coming days. You can also have a look on our DA Facebook page and find it right now. Please share this widely because we want to just get this excitement out into the world for these great candidates. Also keep in mind that Democrats Abroad is an all volunteer run and funded organization, and your support really does go a long way. Please consider making a donation of $20.22 to help us reach at least 20 Texas overseas voters. We also hope that you would consider stepping up as a volunteer because nobody else is out there doing this work of reaching overseas voters. And we need your help to make sure that Texans living abroad really participate in this crucial election. We'll drop some links in the chat. You can join our Slack channel to get involved, or you can write to us at tx@democratsabroad.org. We're going to end the recording now. If you have any questions, you're welcome to stay on for a few minutes. And thank you so much for joining us and for your help to turn Texas blue in 2022.